Could you explain this?
Sir, I'm looking at a picture of an interior. It looks like a bedroom.
Of an airplane.
Yes, sir.
You're not.
The senator didn't ask a question. He held up a picture, and the moment Kristi Noem saw it, something shifted in that room, because what was in that photograph wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't a border chart. It wasn't a deportation statistic. It wasn't anything anyone had prepared for. It was a bedroom, inside an airplane, bought with taxpayer money, and the Secretary of Homeland Security was sitting right there, cameras rolling, her husband seated directly behind her, staring at it. Here's what you need to understand before we get to her answer. Weeks before this hearing, NBC News had obtained interior photos of a Boeing 737 MAX that the Department of Homeland Security was purchasing. The price tag was $70 million US. Inside that plane, a queen-size bed, private showers, a kitchen, a bar, and 4 flat-screen televisions. This was not a government transport aircraft. This was something else, and the official explanation made it worse. DHS said the jet would be used for deportation flights, but this plane held a maximum of 18 passengers. Standard ICE deportation flights carry 50 to 100 people. A DHS official speaking to NBC described that plan as, and this is the word they chose, far-fetched. The math didn't work, the story didn't hold. And no one at DHS had offered a better explanation. By the time this hearing was scheduled, the jet had already become a story. More than 40 House Democrats had written to the White House urging them to block the purchase entirely. The Government Accountability Office had been asked to review whether DHS even had the legal authority to acquire 6 aircraft this way. The scrutiny was already building, and then the Wall Street Journal added something else entirely. They reported that the jet, the one with the bedroom, the one being justified as a deportation aircraft, had been used regularly by Noem and her advisor Corey Lewandowski for personal travel together. Suddenly, this wasn't just a budget story, it was a different story altogether. That's the context Senator Whitehouse walked into on March 3, 2026. This hearing had been scheduled weeks in advance. On paper, it was a standard DHS oversight session. Budget questions, immigration enforcement numbers, routine committee business, but Whitehouse had done his homework. He sat down at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing with one photograph and one question. He turned to the large poster he'd placed behind him. The bedroom, blown up, unmistakable, was visible to everyone in the room. Can you explain this? Reporters stopped typing. Lawmakers leaned forward. Noem's team shifted in their seats. Noem looked at the image. She paused. Then she said something that no one in that chamber expected. I'm looking at a picture of an interior. It looks like a bedroom. She said it like she was seeing it for the first time, like she had never set foot on a $70 million US jet that her own department was in the process of buying. Whitehouse didn't flinch. Of an airplane, you're not familiar with that? Another pause. Longer this time. The room went quiet, but there was another layer to this story. One that made that silence even heavier. The Wall Street Journal had reported that Noem and her senior advisor Corey Lewandowski had been using this exact aircraft together. The plane with the private cabin in the back, the plane with the bedroom, for travel across the country. Noem denied any improper relationship. Lewandowski denied it too, but her husband was sitting 3 feet behind her as Whitehouse held up the photograph, and the room knew it. Every camera in that chamber knew it. Every reporter in that room knew exactly what was being left unsaid. Whitehouse pressed forward. So you did not use a luxury jet with a bedroom in it? Noem shifted. We've used a 737. I've been on it once. She pivoted to budget numbers, deportation flight costs, savings for taxpayers. Whitehouse let her finish. Then he asked again, same question, direct. Does it have a bedroom in it? She couldn't pivot away from it this time. The photograph was still on the poster. The room was still waiting. And she had already said, on camera, that it looked like a bedroom. Whitehouse had now asked the bedroom question 3 times. 3 times she had answered something else, the budget, the statute, the refurbishment. But the photograph hadn't moved, and neither had the question. I believe it's being refurbished, she said finally, not having a bedroom in it. So it is being refurbished. And then Whitehouse asked the question that cut through everything else. What kind of deportee justifies being flown out of the country in a luxury jet with a bedroom and accommodations like this? No clean answer came, because there wasn't one. The deportation argument collapsed against the capacity numbers. The refurbishment answer confirmed the bedroom had existed, And the "I've been on it once" claim sat next to a Wall Street Journal investigation that described regular use. Her husband watched every second of it from just behind her chair. Clips hit social media within minutes. People replayed the pause. They zoomed in on her husband's expression, frame by frame. They went back to the moment she said it looked like a bedroom, the moment she acted like she didn't know, the moment a senator had to explain to the Secretary of Homeland Security what the inside of her own department's $70 million jet looked like. The comment sections didn't move on. They stayed on that 5-second pause, on that on the look on her face when the photograph appeared behind Whitehouse, before she composed herself, before the pivot to budget numbers, before the refurbishment explanation. And then, later in the same hearing, Representative Jamie Raskin raised the blanket. He put the two stories side by side. A pilot fired for forgetting a blanket on one plane, a bedroom being quietly refurbished on another. The room went quiet again, not because of a revelation, because of the picture those two facts painted when placed next to each other. But there was one more detail, one that almost nobody connected to what happened in that room. Weeks before this hearing, a different story had emerged. A Coast Guard pilot had been fired. The reason, according to the Wall Street Journal, was that Noem's blanket had been left behind on another flight. Her blanket, and a pilot lost his job over it. Not many people connected it in the moment, but the picture it painted was hard to ignore. A pilot fired over a blanket, a $70 million jet with a bedroom, a $220 million ad campaign awarded to a firm that didn't exist 2 weeks before they got the contract. Inside the Department of Homeland Security, personal comfort was a priority, and the people who failed to deliver it faced consequences. These weren't separate stories. They were the same story. The hearing continued for hours after the jet exchange. Senator Thom Tillis, a Republican, stood up and described what he was doing as a performance review. Then he called for her resignation. Senator John Kennedy, also a Republican, questioned a $220 million advertising campaign that DHS had launched featuring Noem herself. The contract had gone to a firm created just 11 days before they received it. 2 Republicans, calling out the same secretary, in the same hearing, on the same day. That detail got buried under the jet story, but it mattered, because when members of your own party stand up in a public hearing and say the word resignation, something has already broken. Tillis didn't frame it as an attack. He framed it as an evaluation, a 10-minute performance review delivered in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He referenced the Minneapolis shootings. He referenced the chaos inside the department. He referenced the jet. And at the end of it, he said what 2 weeks of headlines had been building toward. She should go. Kennedy's criticism landed differently, quieter, more precise. He held up the ad campaign numbers. He asked who benefited. He said the spending troubled him. And then, outside the hearing room, he kept going. He called it spending porn. Those words made the afternoon news cycle before the hearing had even finished. And through all of it, the photograph stayed on that poster. The bedroom, the $70 million jet, the 5-second pause. The hearing ended. The cameras packed up. Senators issued statements. Press releases went out. But none of that is what people remembered. What people remembered was the moment a senator held up a photograph and a cabinet secretary said, on live television, under oath, in front of the entire country, that it looked like a bedroom. Not, yes, that's the aircraft we're purchasing. Not, let me explain the context. Just a pause, an and an answer that confirmed everything the question was implying. But the image that stayed with the country wasn't a policy chart or a budget breakdown. It was a blown-up photograph of a bedroom, inside an airplane, held up by a senator while the woman responsible for it sat 3 feet away and said she wasn't sure she recognized it. Days after this hearing, President Trump removed Kristi Noem from her position as Secretary of Homeland Security. The jet is still being refurbished.